Last time you became a full Jedi Knight, you must mean you've now made it to level 3 and have become a Jedi Master. And with this Jedi Master status, we're going to work on adapting and creating games for your classroom. To start this off, I want you to think, how many games or board games can you name? Which is your favorite and what do you like about it? I want you to actively pause the video and answer these questions on paper, on your notebook, on a document, then come back when you're done. See how your answers compare to mine. I'll share mine in just a minute. All right, welcome back. My favorite game is called Betrayal at House on the Hill. I could name lots of board games. I'm a huge board game geek. I'm a huge fan of strategy games. I used to play them all the time, a little less now I've got kids. They don't like to play them as much, and being small, they can't do most of these. My favorite is definitely Betrayal at House on the Hill. So what I like about it, I like you get to choose a character to act as, and each character has different strengths and weaknesses. However, you won't know which abilities, their speed, their might, their sanity, or their knowledge, will be most beneficial until later in the game. So you can't go, oh, it's always going to be Zoe, or it's always going to be Brandon. I also really like that it's a cooperative game until it isn't. So the board game itself is different every single time, which means the gameplay is always unique based on what order the tiles come up, where people place them, and what cards you draw, and what you roll against those cards. Eventually, one of you will turn into a bad guy, but you won't know who it is until it happens. And even then, it's still cooperative for some of you to compete against, or for your team to compete against the bad guy. And at that point, there are still 50 plus different scenarios to play out to try and win for both the bad guy and the good guys. These are the things I've thought of that made my game fun. You may have had some that were the same and probably had plenty that were different. But think about those components. That's what's important as we go through and talk about these games and bring some of those components into our classroom. So, what have we found out from playing games in general? What different playing pieces did your games have? Again, you may want to pause, answer this question yourself for the game you're thinking of before I go through mine. If so, now would be a great time to push that pause button and then come on back. Great, I'm going to assume you did that. I don't know what game you picked because my psychic skills are pretty weak. My Jedi skills are not up to snuff with yours. So I'll just talk through my game. In Betrayal at House on the Hill, there are 12 possible characters, plus there are playing pieces for both like the people and the bad guys, all their minions, and like trapdoors and things in the rooms. So there are probably 100 plus pieces in the game. Did my board have any special spaces? If I ignore the fact that all the rooms show up differently each time, almost every room had a symbol on it that caused something unique to happen when you drew the card and or when you entered or left. What was the theme? I'd say the theme for mine is kind of like survival / exploratory and strategy. Strategy is not the theme, it's the type of game. And how do you win the games you played? Well, by meeting the different requirements based on one of those 50 different scenarios. It was always different as you went through it. I'd love to know where yours are the same, where's yours different. I'll ask that in the Google form. All right, ideas from games. We'll get into actual game design and mechanics later, but for now, let's talk about the ways we can use some small game elements to gamify things we already do in life. We can use a timer. So just general life examples could be, we use a timer to clean as much in that amount of time as possible in a room. I do this with my kids half the time. We got 4 minutes, go, go, go. We could use the timer as a countdown to see if a kid can do something in less than 10 seconds or X seconds. Like, hey, I'll tell my kids, there's no way you can throw that down the chute in less than 10 seconds. 10, 9, they take off running, make it happen. We're gamifying putting clothes down the laundry chute. You could also set a timer to get this much work done before you do some kind of break, dance break, just a social break, games, cards, some other kind of activity. Those are all timer options. Other mechanics you can bring into play are just creating asinine rules. So maybe when you're brushing your teeth, you have to use your opposite hand and do it for a minute straight. That's crazy and different and weird, but by doing that, you then have to think on it and focus. It's more interesting. Or have you ever heard the saying, don't step on the crack, you'll break your mama's back? Doing that to have the kids not step on cracks makes it more interesting for them walking home. If you have to make a rule where you must step on the lines or can't step on the lines, have to jump over them, have to turn every time you pass one, all those make walking more interesting. I made rules like that when we go on hikes with my kids, because shockingly, after the first 2 minutes, they're bored. When I can gamify the hike or the walk, they stay with me in a much better attitude much longer. Or it might be the rule like, oh, we have a minute, we can only pick up the blue toys. Then they have fun just finding the blue ones. Or you can only pick up the dirty clothes if you shoot them like a basketball into the laundry basket. I've seen teachers do it where you can't enter the room until you're able to answer a basic fact from the last week we've done in class on that lesson or on that topic. They just go back in line and over until every kid gets a question right. And then you can also kind of go back to our power-up idea from before. Maybe a kid who's gotten it right has the ability to get a power-up or do something to help out a friend. Or the rule is that a student who gets their desk cleaned up first gets to be the line leader, or gets their desk to be the third person, or you can make whatever kind of weird rule you want to give some kind of benefit. All right, more ideas are randomness. So mine had tons and tons of randomness, which I made it lots of fun for me. Like my game had the dice to roll to determine what happened next in the game based on the outcome of that roll and what stats your character had. But we can apply that in different ways in our life, such as if you have a deck of cards and you pull one every 10 minutes, and based on what suit comes up, something happens. So for example, if you pull up diamonds, you keep working, or the class keeps working. If you pull up spades, the class gets to change the genre of music playing for that next 10 minutes. If it's clubs, they get to have a 2-minute go noodle or dance party break. And if it's hearts, it has to be totally quiet work time in class until the next card draw. So none of those things should be super disruptive for class. You can easily change what any of those things are, but there's that anticipation of what's this card draw going to be. It makes it fun, which is what games often are, inside your classroom. You could also I know of a teacher who's done it where they have a set of cards for an assessment day, and one student gets to draw a card out of it, and based on the number of that card, a bunch of things could happen. So that number could do nothing, they just take their test. Or a different number could mean it's a partner test. Or they get to use their study card, or their note card. Or it could mean they get 5 minutes with their books, etc. You can put whatever you want in there. But since you're the DM, it stands for Dungeon Master. If you've never played Dungeons & Dragons, the Dungeon Master is the person who controls, sets up the scenarios, controls what happens, sets the odds and the monsters and things. Since you get to play that role of the controlling force in your classroom, usually, you can choose if and how much you want to stack the deck. Do you actually have all the cards in there, or is it just 2s, 3s, and 4s? Do you just have 1, 2, and all the 3s and 4s? What odds are in there? You should have at least one card available for anything you're willing to give them, but you don't necessarily have to make it even, depending on what your goal is for the learning of that day. You could also do a choice board spinner. So you can have a physical spinner or a digital spinner. Those are much easier to change. A spinning wheel that randomly decides what students do for practice. So let's say it was math. There could be options for math puzzles or math centers or a challenging problem of the day you all work through together, or math games or something. So you spin it, and it came up with this. Here's what we're going to do. That randomness lets the kids know that there's going to be variety and change, and it goes with that. You could have a class jobs jar. So have a list of class jobs in a glass jar, and you randomly pick students to fill those roles each week, or however you want to do it. That adds that variety and randomness and fun to it. You could do something like reading roulette. So So you assign different types of reading. Maybe it's like silent or with a partner or the teacher reads or group discussion, etc., to numbers on a die, and you roll to see how the reading time will go for that day. If it comes up as a 3, you do the set thing. Or I think I've heard of people doing like homework pass lottery. So at the end of each week, you could have a lottery draw where one student can win a homework pass or whatever else you want to give away. This could always include every student, or you could have your class currency and have students buy into the lottery each week, change their own ranking system, talk about statistics and probability. These are all flexible, right? So we talked about iterative nature, how you want to adapt things, make it work. These are just potential options that you should be putting in your notebook or your Google Doc or whatever you're using for ideas, and say, I like that kind of, how can I adapt it? One more idea for randomness. You could do like brain break dice, similar to that reading roulette, but with different type of activities linked to a 1 or a 2, to 1 or 2 dice being rolled a few minutes before the brain break. So if we get a 1 or a 2 or a 3, we do this. We get this number, we get this. Pick what you want for an example, a brain break, and they do that activity. Okay. Reminder. All of these gamification pieces we've looked at, and will continue to look at, are simply possible pieces that can be used to add fun, engagement, variety, challenge, and restrictions to your classroom. Don't get bogged down in the details. It's best to start simple and simply start playing. You'll need to iterate and change things that won't work well, but you won't know what those things are until you actually start doing it. And yes, I said restrictions. Restrictions makes things more fun, more interesting. It's the opposite of that blank page effect. If I say, okay, go write 500 words, if I give you no boundaries, no restrictions, that's pretty challenging. If I say, it's got to be about this topic, it's got to involve 3 characters and do these pieces, you got a rough draft or an idea what you got to do, that's easier to do. Okay, then let's talk about remixing games. Here's a whole bunch of ideas, and I'll talk about each one of them individually. So remixing games means taking a game and changing what its original purpose was to fit a different need. So for Math Monopoly, you could adapt Monopoly to practice math skills. You could move around the board solving problems to earn money or points, but only if you get it right. Each type of property could maybe involve doing a different math function. Maybe the yellow ones you have to add fractions, the green ones you have to calculate percentages, or multiplying decimals. Or you could play the game as it is, but each property costs a random fraction of the actual cost that must be calculated by the player correctly in order to buy the property. Or another example would be content Jenga. So there could be facts or questions on each piece that need to be answered after being pulled or must be put back. Or there could be a random group of questions and scenarios that have to be answered before you pull or you don't get to. Or they must create a scenario about the last 2 topics that got pulled before they're able to pull another piece. I like that one because it requires you to do some random connectedness and have a little higher order thinking skills of saying, how does this connect to that, or how would it relate to the book we're reading or whatever you're doing in class, have them tie in there. Could do something called literary Catan, which would be like designing a board similar to the Catan game, Settlers of Catan, but locations representing different literary genres, fantasy, mystery, sci-fi. Players collect resource cards, be like descriptive words or character types or plot points to build settlements, which would be like your poems or short stories that follow the genre-specific rules. You could do art history checkers or potentially chess, but that might get more complicated. So you take a checkers board and you put images or descriptions of famous artworks. Players attempt to move the checkers, but they only get to if they correctly identify the artist, style, or period of the artwork, or any other requirement you have of them to do that. For these video game activities and links in that fifth bullet point, I'll let you explore them in the resources. Here, I'll click on them real quick. Most of these are free, but like they're from, what's her name? Blanking. She's a bunch of escape rooms. Not Holly Clark. Doesn't matter. So you got 10 different like activity packs, how you can tie in Minecraft and Roblox and like into PE classes, or do Fortnite or Mario for interactive experience. So look at all these. Most of these are free. A few of them cost money, but like they give good ideas of how you can do a Fortnite choice board, or doing Fortnite in a PE class and have them do a battle royale. Really cool ideas, or doing an English paper around a book cover and tell a story based on that being created. Those are really fun. Okay, and then virtual board games to modify or use. This is just a link that I'll have in the resources for you. It gives you a bunch of like old school digital board games, kind of like the checkers you talked about, that you can then alter. So that'd be an easy one to say, hey, here's my checker game. I want to stick all these images of paintings on there, and you can then have them use it that way. You don't have to actually destroy your own physical game. Okay, those are ideas. Again, whatever fits in your class will probably be different. So you have to change, adapt, and do it. That's kind of the iterative process that comes to gamification. I'm happy to bounce ideas off with you and see what you're thinking, what might work, how we can do it. I've had these conversations with a bunch of teachers. Happy to have a bunch more. All right, our, I think, third and last piece of this, game mechanics. This is where we start getting a little more in depth to how the parts of the game work in the classroom, depending on how deep you want to go. Right, so there's 4 components in game mechanics. So first is it a collaborative or competitive environment? As you probably saw in the game or games you were thinking of earlier, like the social aspect is an important part of the gameplay. In my Betrayal at the House on the Hill example, both the collaborative nature of the one team versus the competitive nature to beat the other player that turned evil was a big component of the gameplay. So depending on your goals, you might just want just collaborative, just competitive, or both. That's up to you. Just keep it in mind as you're thinking of how you want the class to function. All right, then solo versus multiplayer. Whether you want to have the students play the game by themselves, think Monopoly or Jeopardy, or in teams, think like charades or Fortnite, or everyone all together, like Pandemic or World of Warcraft, where they're all going against some big common threat. You might just use one of these or use all of them depending on your goals for your class. All right, campaigns or endless type of games. So a campaign style game is one in which you are likely to have levels and goals and definite things to achieve and accomplish. This is usually how classroom games are set up, as it lets students progress in levels, have set rules to earn badges or points or grades, and a clear endpoint to beat the game or finish the class. Some examples of this type of game are Arkham Horror, Terraforming Mars, and Halo, which are all great games, by the way. On the endless side, these games are ones in which the replayability is super high since there is no end. They're usually much more open. You can keep exploring or playing for an infinite amount of time. In the game world, a classic example of this is Tetris, which in theory has no end, although some kid just beat and broke it recently. Or Minecraft, where you can just constantly explore and build and create and do anything in a pretty open and expansive world. So on the classroom side of things, this might look like students creating a city or state or country or world that starts with basic elements and adds complexity as they learn more about the concepts in your class. So maybe it's adding new species to an ecosystem in science, or new countries with different governmental systems and the disputes it would cause, etc. Or it might look like a never-ending story. No, not the movie, for those of you old enough to understand that reference, but a story where students would create like an ongoing tale or narrative, maybe using themselves or characters of their own making. They continue to add sections or chapters based on how each new topic you study. This can be done either individually or as a cooperative story writing process. That's where you get that collaborative or competitive or just solo or multiplayer piece in there. Finally, another way, and there's plenty of other options, but this is the third one I'll give you for an example. This might look like in the classroom could be by having students work on open-ended problem solving. You can have your students work on some real-world problems. Maybe they're designing a sustainable city, or creating a rescue plan for a crisis, or creating a new invention for some need in the community. Since there's no one right answer to any of these problems, it's already open requires higher level thinking, but as they progress through the project, you can make it endless by adding in new twists or problems that arise to keep the challenge going. I did this with my end of unit projects in chemistry, and it was really great to make the kids think. They kind of got mad sometimes, but watching the wheels turn in their head as they then found new ways to adapt and change and apply the concepts was fascinating. All right, the last two, scripted or emergent game mechanic. So scripted usually work best when like the answer is known, there's a set piece to it, or emergent is usually when the outcome is unknown, kind of like we were just talking about that last bullet point. So these are similar to campaigns and endless, but there are some differences to it. So scripted just means that there's a very set path for things to happen, and it's a more structured type of lesson. Emergent means that the world is more open and go with the flow type of mentality. In the classroom, this would be more type of collaborative activities or project-based learning. You can easily mix the two together, whatever amount of each makes sense for your classroom, but just know that like, I think it was more like, it must be my way setting, or yeah, we can kind of figure it out and go as we go, or do it as we go and adjust as makes sense for the kid and their learning process. There's pros and cons to both. Okay, I'll take a deep breath and continue. Oops, we don't need that page. I think that's our last one. I went too far. Yep, okay, skip all those slides. These are other slides I didn't use. Game mechanics are our last piece. That's the end of level 3. I gave you a whole lot, and there's even more in the resources. Check them out. You've got one more Google form to advance to level 4, your final level, and then you get to choose what you want to do for your project or projects for PD and to make your classroom a game or gamified.